Welcome, everyone. I'm really excited to talk with Dr. Peter Kahn today. If you guys aren't familiar with Dr. Kahn's work, I mean, he's been an educator for so long in helping people overcome chronic disease. He's a chiropractic neurologist out here in Gilbert, Arizona. He's the founder of the B.I.G Masterclass, the Brain Immune Gut Masterclass, and he's an expert in neurometabolic health. So, Dr. Kahn, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Darin. It's a pleasure, and it's just always great to bounce ideas off of you.
You know, you and I have been dealing with chronic illness, chronic disease for so long, and we all have kind of our different ways of thinking about it. But I really like the way you synthesize, really from top to bottom, what leads to chronic disease and really how you overcome it. And I like this idea of neurometabolic health. We know when you look at the statistics nationwide in terms of metabolic fitness, we know the overwhelming majority of Americans are not what we call metabolically fit. In fact, the statistics, I think it's under 10%. I think maybe it's 6 or 7% of adult Americans are what they consider metabolically fit. Compare that to maybe 40 years ago, where I don't know what the percentage was, but I'm guessing it was probably over 90%. So we've seen this huge shift, but you add this other layer of neurometabolic health. Can you talk a little bit about what that means?
Yeah, and I think you're so correct. We really suffer in this country from a metabolic crisis. And when we say metabolism, what we mean by that is, or the scientific term for metabolism is the ability to break down energy, right? To break down energy and convert it into some usable form. So what happens in this country, we have a metabolic crisis in the sense that people are over consuming calories, they're consuming the wrong type of calories, people are sedentary, and then you add all these other inflammatory triggers, like from processed food, from environmental toxins. So we have people who are very challenged in their metabolism. And this metabolism is not just a calorie in, calorie out issue, right? Because metabolism, to a large degree, is controlled by many different hormones, right? Your thyroid hormones involved, adrenal hormones, your sex hormones, and insulin, these blood sugar regulating hormones. But then your metabolism is also impacted by your mitochondria, right? Which is the individual units of your body that produces energy. So we have a lot of people in this country that are very challenged metabolically due to the lifestyle choices that we're making. And as a result, we have this epidemic of obesity, epidemic of blood sugar problems, diabetes, and all the downstream resultant issue from that, like cognitive decline, like Alzheimer's disease, neurodegeneration, heart disease. Almost everything that people are worried about can be stemmed from, to a large part, this metabolic dysfunction, either directly because of the metabolic dysfunction or the fact that they're so inflamed from something else like Lyme disease or other, chronic issues, chronic infections that's causing the metabolism to be disrupted. So we have this metabolism issue. Now, what I think people are not realizing is that neurologically, your brain is very much impacted by the metabolism, and it can also control and directly control that metabolism. So for example, when you feel any kind of brain symptom like depression, right? Depression means depressed, meaning slower function, right? If you try to depress something, you're trying to push it down. So
Right.
depression is describing a lower mood. So like your brain function is being pushed down or suppressed in a way. And that's why you're feeling depressive symptoms. Like you feel blue, you feel sad, you don't want to do anything, you feel lethargic, lack of motivation, apathy. These are all like symptoms of like you don't want to move, right? Because it's being depressed. Well, depression means that your brain is not able to fire synaptically, right? Can't get neurotransmitter to fire across that synapse. So therefore, your brain cells are not talking to each other as efficiently. And therefore, you can't do the stuff that you want to do with your brain, whether it's to feel something, whether it's to get motivated to do something, whether it's to calculate something, then that turns into the symptom of depression or even brain fog, right? Brain fog is a symptom that's typically caused by some type of neuroinflammation or lack of fuel. So then you have decreased nerve conduction velocity from one brain cell to another, because that's the way your brain sends messages, by relaying this baton. So, neurologically, when you have a decreased neurological function, then you're going to get these brain symptoms. And turns out that your brain is super sensitive to metabolic disturbances. So if you have blood sugar issue, that's going to impact your ability for your brain to be able to process information. If you have hypoxia, low oxygen state, which is going to impact your metabolism as well, that's also going to impact brain function. So what I've realized in practice is that in order to get somebody better, not only do we have to improve their metabolism, when I say metabolism, I don't mean just lose weight, I mean mitochondria energy production, so they can do the things that their body needs to do to heal. But also we need to improve the brain function as well. So if you just improve the metabolism without improving brain function, we don't get that far. If we just improve brain function but not metabolism, we don't get that far as well. When we treat a person both neurologically and metabolically, things get better much faster.
You know, you and I were talking a little bit before we came online about, mitochondria. And it's funny because we know that, mitochondria, we'll say damage, is really behind a lot of chronic disease. And it's very easy for us just to throw some pills at it and say, okay, well, we know things like CoQ10, acetyl L-carnitine, vitamin B6, these can help stimulate mitochondria. But why is that often not enough?
Yeah, and that's a really a great question. I think, people who've been in practice for a long time and actually really pay attention, like you and I and many other our colleagues, we notice that, that, hey, this sounds like or look like a mitochondria problem, right? Because where's mitochondria? Well, every single cell in your body. So when you have a mitochondria issue, oftentimes it's systemic. It's everywhere. So not only that your brain doesn't work, your muscle don't work that well, the gut doesn't work that well, everything gets impacted. Now, certainly you can have a mitochondria failure in just one specific area, one specific tissue, like just in your brain, because you hit your brain. But oftentimes what we see is people have this chronic fatigue, syndrome, CFS, this type of pattern that indicates that there may be some mitochondria involvement. But what I've noticed is that when I give people quote unquote mitochondria support, D-ribose, CoQ10, as you mentioned, acetyl L-carnitine, B vitamins, it's not a magic cure for a lot of people, right? Some people, they
Right.
feel some better, but it doesn't address the totality of the problem. So then the next question will be like, okay, if this mitochondrial supplement didn't fix the common mitochondria problem, then what are other issues? And I think this goes back to the basics, Darin. I'm always trying to get myself and my patients to think back to the basics, right? So it's kind of like this hierarchy. In my content, I also call it a roadmap or a sequence. However we want to call it, it means that there's a first step, there's a second step, there's what's most important, there's less second important. The hierarchy for mitochondria is that mitochondria don't function without fuel. Mitochondria functions with fuel, which comes from the food that you eat. That's going to be glucose or protein and fat that can be broken down through various pathways, eventually filter out down into glucose or fatty acids, so you can use it for energy. And then your mitochondria needs oxygen, right? Without oxygen, you cannot drive that pathway. So number one, we have to establish fuel. And this relates back to the metabolic crisis that we talked about. So many people have this metabolic crisis because they're not fueling themselves properly. They eat too much refined carbs, or the ratio between the protein, fats, and carbs is not, dialed in for them individually, or they're skipping meals because they're busy, they're stressed, or they're stressed, so then the cortisol's out of balance. So then that in turn mess up with the blood sugar, which drives this metabolic imbalance. So we have this a lot of people who have mitochondria issue, not because they're not getting enough CoQ10, but they're not fueling themselves. They're not eating properly. Now, I want to make another mention that mitochondria gets activated with activity, with exercise. Like exercise, like if you think about mitochondria as the engine of the car, which it is, we call it the factory, the power plant of the cell.
Right.
It's the engine. The engine don't run without gas, or these days electricity or whatever you want, like EVs. But the engine don't run without some type of substrate or fuel source, right? So that fuel source for humans is, for living organisms is food, right? That's your blood glucose. So you got to have fuel. And then secondly, the fuel, even if you have gas in the car, but the car don't just run on themselves. They have to get started. You have to ignite or activate the car, right? So you have to start the car. And that activation is exercise. So like a lot of people, they're just, again, and I'm not saying it's wrong to take a mitochondria supplement if it's appropriate. There's a time and place for everything. But I think people got to start thinking about hierarchy and priority. Like what's the most important thing for my mitochondria? And am I doing them? Am I checking that box? Because if that box is not checked and you're just going straight for mitochondrial support and you didn't check the box of exercise every day, you didn't check the box of eating properly and getting enough fiber and protein and fats and and complex carb rather than the simple carbs, then you didn't check the box. Then taking the mitochondrial supplement is not going to get you where you need to be. That's why it's not enough.
Yeah, and I think about all the things that damage neurometabolic health. I mean, I think that often damages mitochondria, and it seems to me, you're doing all this stuff to try and repair this potentially damaged mitochondria, but if you don't stop the influx of all the things that are constantly causing inflammation, causing that mitochondrial damage, you can't repair something. It's kind of like, when you got a building on fire and you're throwing buckets of water on it, it's like it's just not effective. You've got to take a different approach and stop that influx. You want to choke off the oxygen to fire. You want to stop the thing that keeps it going and going. And of course, we could probably have a whole nother conversation about the gazillion things that lead to that kind of neural gut inflammation. But has that been your experience as well? Is that you've also got to stop this influx of all the things that are constantly damaging the body?
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing it up because it can go both ways, right? So earlier I made this case of, hey, if you're trying to fix your mitochondria by doing detox and addressing, taking CoQ10, but you don't get the basics down, like did you exercise today? Did you eat right? Then those stuff is not going to work. On the other hand, though, if you're eating right and you exercise, but yeah, you have this gazillion things as we all can identify, like environmental toxins, chronic infections like Lyme and mycotoxins, all these different, environmental insults. If you don't get rid of those, and if you and that's something that's impacting you, then all the great diet and all the great exercise is not going to cut it either, right? So it's more about looking at the totality. And I think my point is that oftentimes when people don't feel good, they're searching for an answer. And often the answer they're searching is probably something that they need to do, but on the hierarchy of things, it's probably something that the next order hierarchy, when they should be doing the baseline foundational stuff, make sure that's really solid before we move on to the next thing. So it's not saying that detox or heavy metals or mycotoxins and all these things or it's not important. It's just that we got to make sure we're checking that box every step of the way. And if we do that, I think it'll be easier for people to identify what's actually the thing that's going to move the needle for them the most. And what I see personally is a lot of clients they're simply just ignoring exercise, and maybe they're ignoring exercise because they're so tired and they feel like they can't.
Right.
And what I say is that you can. You just got to do what you can. It's not that you can't. You got to do what you can. And for some people, it may be just starting with some exercise they can do in bed. This could be just like lay in bed and just do some arm bicycling or leg bicycle. This could be doing some isometric exercise. This could be just a starting point for them. So then they are activating the mitochondria, right? So it's kind of like a vicious cycle. If you want the mitochondria to work better and have more energy, you got to do the thing, which is the exercise. But then it's hard to exercise because you don't have energy. But that's where the work, right? The work, which is often perceived as difficult for people, is getting themselves to do it. I also understand that when you have neurometabolic health issues, the neuro part of this neurometabolic health issue may cause them to feel brain foggy and lack of motivation. So then it's harder for them to do the things they need to do. That's part of the issue. Like to get someone who's chronically ill to do everything we ask them to do, the diet, the supplements, and all these things, it can be very overwhelming. Totally get it. And this is why I always default to what's the minimum, right? The minimum effective dose. What's the least thing that I can do to at least get started before we can do the harder things? They can always exercise in some way, and they can always get the diet dialed in because they got to move and they got to eat anyways. Why don't we start there?
Yeah. Well, as somebody living with MS, I have difficulty with, a lot of types of exercise. And I follow a guy named Trevor Wicken, who's great. He developed called the MS Gym. And it's about all the things you can do to move your body that don't involve, running and even necessarily walking. It's things, again, you can do in a chair, you can do from the bed, you can do when you are in a wheelchair. So I know it's all easy for all of us to make excuses on why we don't move our body the way we should. But your point, I mean, is right on that that little bit of movement, your body recognizes, and it may not feel like a lot to you, at least initially, but over time, that's going to be one more thing that's going to start getting those mitochondria to fire. And ultimately, I mean, that makes a huge difference when you combine it with all these other things that you're doing.
Yeah, I really appreciate you saying that. It's I think oftentimes people take it for granted what people who are relatively healthy, they don't have any impairment, they can exercise. We kind of take it for granted. And we don't really understand people who have some type of physical impairment, how difficult it is for them to modify things and do things exercise-wise to benefit them. So it's a challenge for sure. But again, just like you said, this is video that's programmed by somebody that teach you how to exercise in a wheelchair. And then we all know people who's, you know, paraplegic or had a car accident and they become paralyzed and now they're just in a wheelchair or whatnot. And they're just like, hey, I'm still going to go run a marathon, or I'm still going to go play basketball or tennis, even though in a wheelchair. Right. So we all seen an example of that. So that should serve as inspiration. That doesn't mean tomorrow you're going to go run a marathon just because, but it all starts somewhere, right? And usually these type of things compounds over time. It's more about consistency. And that's what I try to do when and we have an upcoming event is really to get people to take action and realize how quick you can feel a difference. Doesn't mean you're going to fix it in a few days, but you can feel a difference right away.
Yeah, I want to talk just a little bit more about the blood sugar thing because, again, I'm seeing it in my practice. People are, I think, they're not aware of their blood sugar. They're not aware when their blood sugar is out of balance. And of course, the American food supply does not help in any way of helping people have healthy blood sugars. Can you just speak a little bit about, how would people know if they're really having blood sugar issues? Short of going to your doctor and doing a blood test or doing a little finger prick where you can actually check it, how would people necessarily know if they're starting to have those issues?
Yeah, and this is something where I really believe symptom tracking, right? Being aware of your own symptom. And this is something that everybody can do. And this is basically teaching patients how to become their own body whisperer, right? Become your own body whisperer so you're more aware of your symptoms and what it means. What is your body trying to tell you when you have symptoms? And the good thing is blood sugar symptoms is very telltale. It's very easy to pick out, so to speak, from a lineup. So if you have hypoglycemia, which means your blood sugar runs low. And when I say hypoglycemia, by the way, I don't want people to think like if you have hypoglycemia, that means your blood sugar is chronically always low all the time. Hypoglycemia describes a state that you can go in and out of. So you might be hypoglycemic for like a few minutes, and the next thing you know, your body compensates for it by releasing cortisol or adrenaline, and your blood sugar goes up. Then your blood sugar symptom may go away after a while, or you eat and it goes away. But when you are hypoglycemic, you may feel symptoms of feeling lightheaded, jittery, shaky. You may feel irritable. People call it hangry. And then you may feel memory issues. You may just feel more tired and foggy. If you have some type of, a nervous system issues like MS, for example, or other neurological issues, then those neurological symptoms may become more pronounced. Like if somebody has balance problem, vestibular issue, and they have hypoglycemia, they may experience more easier to trigger off that balance problem or motion sickness, right? So that's hypoglycemia. And the hallmark here is that when you don't eat or you wait too long before you eat, like you skip a meal or something, then you feel worse. Worse typically in a way of brain function. Hypoglycemia is actually a brain symptom. Hypoglycemia is not a blood sugar problem. It's actually a problem that's perceived or felt in your brain. Like what the heck is hangry? What do you feel hangry? Like in your pec and your glute? No, you feel hangry in your brain, right? So it's a brain symptom. My point is this neurometabolic, right? This is the perfect example of neurometabolic. Your metabolism tanks, your blood sugar tanks, and you feel it in your brain in the form of being hangry and hypoglycemic. That is a perfect example of neurometabolic health. The problem is when you feel that hangry and hypoglycemic symptom, you already lost some neurons. Like your neurons already like faltering. It's like they kind of melt away. The Wizard of Oz, the witch go, I'm melting. Like literally your brain cells are melting away as you become a hypoglycemic. So it's really not that funny. because like you want to protect your brain. You want to preserve as much brain cells as possible. You're not trying to speed it up. If you're always skipping meals and stress and eating when you don't have time, then it's going to be very difficult. Okay, so hypoglycemia is kind of easy to pick out by the pure symptom of you feel worse or more fatigue or worse brain function when you don't eat, and then you eat, ah, instantly you feel better. That would be hypoglycemia. Now, on the other hand, insulin resistance folks who have higher blood sugar, that the classic symptom there's going to be fatigue after they eat. So hypoglycemics, they feel better after they eat. Insulin resistance, they feel worse after they eat. Worse in what way? Right? Sometimes people say, "Oh, after I eat, I feel stomach pain." Well, that's not insulin resistance symptom. That's a
Right.
food reaction or whatnot. So the symptom is again energy, neurometabolic. We're talking about brain, right? Where do you experience fatigue? You experience it in your brain, not in your body. So when you feel worse, in a sense, you feel fatigued or drowsy or sleepy after you eat, that's usually insulin resistance. Now, with insulin resistance, you can also have other symptoms as well. Like you have a lot of sweet cravings, you may gain weight, you may have centripetal weight gain, belly fat. This is all a result of just your blood sugars running high because you're insulin resistant. So the glucose gets converted to triglycerides stored in the fat. So typically there's a weight gain. Although some people can have insulin resistant and not appear to be overweight, but that may be a down the line thing. So those are the two ways that we can tell. Those are symptoms we can tell very simply just by symptom alone, whether you're hypoglycemic or insulin resistant. Now, some people can have both hypoglycemia and insulin resistant. That means your blood sugar is up and down like a roller coaster, right? So people often trying to put themselves in the category, I'm hypoglycemic or I'm insulin resistant. What if you have symptom in both? Oh yeah, I feel tired after I eat, and sometimes I feel better after I eat. What does that mean? That means your blood sugar is probably not stable. Your blood sugar is probably not stable because you're not eating stably. You're not eating in a way to promote blood sugar stability, or you're not exercising to activate the mitochondria to use up all your glucose reserves, or you have some kind of inflammatory thing going on that's triggering some type of cortisol inflammatory cytokine response, which inflammatory cytokines basically just breaks your metabolism, break your hormones. It does a lot of things to your metabolism. So those are the general reasons. But even if you have inflammation problem, it doesn't mean you can't still stabilize your blood sugar. Whatever the reason is, you have low blood sugar symptom, you can simply just fix that low blood sugar symptom. How might you fix it? Well, don't skip meals, right? People with hypoglycemia are not candidates for fasting or intermittent fasting, right? Not yet. That doesn't mean we're not trying to get you there. But if your metabolism is broken at this time, it's like your car has a flat tire, but you insist on entering a car race. So it's like, okay, I want to race, but you have a flat tire. Why don't we fix the flat tire first, and then you can go race later? But people are just trying to race on a flat tire, and that's why they're not getting anywhere. So we got to do things like hierarchy. You know what I mean? Like a car. Put some gas in the car, fix the flat tires, make sure the engine's starting, and then you can go race. But people just want to race. They want to run before they walk. We have to like
Right.
prioritize it.
Yeah, I should add too that I see this in my practice all the time where people are having higher blood sugars when we check their blood levels. And it's not always dietary. I mean, sometimes it is, like you said, it's cortisol, it's stress, it's lack of sleep, it's all these other things that cause other hormonal imbalances that affect your blood sugar. Because people say, look, I'm not eating garbage, I'm eating very clean. And we'll see that their blood sugar is running high. Sometimes their hemoglobin A1C runs a little high, and it isn't always dietary. So, this is where stress management, exercise, good sleep, in addition to everything we already talked about, can help improve your metabolic fitness.
Absolutely. I totally agree.
Well, I know you've got this program coming out. You're going to do a challenge with people. Can you tell people a little bit about what's involved and when it starts?
Yeah, and thank you for letting me share. So this is called a neurometabolic challenge, since we've been talking about neurometabolic health. So, and what this is a 5-day event where every day we're going to be teaching about certain aspect of neurometabolic health, like what is it, and what are the parts involved, and what can throw it off, and what can we do to make things better. So there's some teaching pre-recorded content by me and then some of our speakers. But most importantly, every day there's going to be a live interactive session where I'm going to actually take the audience, those who register, live through certain type of activity. And these activity each day is going to be different. That's going to help them to start to build this habit. of improving their neurometabolic health. It could be involving some type of, physical activity. It could be involving doing something dietarily to stabilize the blood sugar. So every day we're going to take you through it. And the idea here is to get people to take action. You see, all these summits and webinars and all the stuff, it's great. But a head full of information that's not implemented is nothing. And I find that a lot of people, they're just collecting data, but not acting on it. And furthermore, they're not acting on the most important thing. Like I said, the hierarchy. So we're going to take people through this 5-day event where we're going to do the hierarchical stuff, the most important, the stuff that everybody can do on their own, and offer some ways for them to adjust it if they need to, so that they can start to do these things and start to feel, wow, I'm hypoglycemic, or I have hypoglycemia symptoms. And when I did this, my hypoglycemia went away and I feel so much better. Like, doesn't take much sometimes. Sometimes can take longer, but either way, you got to start somewhere. And if you just start, you're going to start to feel how it can help you. And then you might want to continue. And that's the goal, right? Every 1,000-mile journey starts with a single step. And this might be a single step for some people.
Well, I strongly encourage anyone who's tuning in, and please share this with your friends or family who've been struggling with chronic illness. Again, I don't know anyone better than you who really breaks it down in very simple, easy to understand, but very practical ways of like, this is what you can do today to start changing your health, to start changing your life. And I've seen bits of your big masterclass, which was just amazing. And I know this is probably going to be like a little shorter version of it, but I like the fact that you're stepping in every day, you're offering practical tips. And so we'll make sure and we'll drop the link in the show notes here so that people can sign up. But again, I'm very grateful that you were able to spend some time with me today, explain neurometabolic health, and I'm excited for people to join you in the Neurometabolic Challenge.
Thank you for letting me share, Darin.
Great. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you.